This is the Detroit Sports Podcast Network.
I was trying to get it out here. I want them dead presidents. I want to pull up, head spin, get fly. I got 6 jobs. I don't get tired. I don't get tired.
Here we are in the latest episode of Two Bad Hombres, by the way, with my man, the man, Aaron, the man, McMann. How many times did I say man there? But anyways, he is the man from MLive.com, Michigan beat writer, reporter, extraordinaire when it comes to U of M, everything. Aaron, thanks for doing this with me, and how are you doing, by the way?
I'm good, Vito. It's good to be back. I know I've done this before with you, and I always have a blast doing these.
It is always fun talking with you, and it's been a while since we last chatted, but a lot to talk about. And I guess first and foremost is the Michigan victory last Saturday at the Big House over the rivals from Crosstown and East Lansing in Sparty. 44-10, blowout victory. Really, the game was never in question for Michigan, outside of maybe the start, right? Michigan State scores for 7-0. 44-3, Michigan outscores Sparty after that, Aaron. Yeah. How was the game taking it all in?
It was, I think most of us predicted Michigan would win that game, but in that fashion, I think is what was a surprising aspect. They were able to do what they wanted. Now, they didn't run the ball a ton. They didn't try to. From the get-go, they were throwing the football. It was, and I wrote this after the game, it was very much the speed and space offense Josh Gaddis and the Michigan players and coaching staff were talking about in the preseason. This is what I think many fans were expecting, them kind of getting the football out to the receivers on the outside, making them, getting those yards after catch. And that's what Michigan was able to do. Michigan State really had no answer for them. They tried to do a couple different things to stop it, and they couldn't. And I think you saw Michigan's offense grow in front. I mean, we've seen it grow in the last few weeks, but that was, I think, a new step for them. And it was a good win for the Michigan football program. And
do you think Michigan had to rout Michigan State and prove a point?
I think they thought they would have to. They beat Notre Dame pretty handily. They had turned a corner offensively, and Jim Harbaugh had said that in the weeks prior that he felt like they were finding their stride. They needed that. Given the fact how the season started, the blowout loss at Wisconsin, the close loss at Penn State, they needed something to hold on to and tangibly say that, hey, to put up on the wall and say, we're proud of this. This is something we were able to accomplish. And they did. So, and I think you saw that at the end of the game when they kept some of their starters in. They scored that late touchdown, Shea Patterson, that pass to Cornelius Johnson. They said afterwards they were trying to prove, they were trying to score as much as they could and make an impact and make a statement, and they did. They're 2 for 2 now in the rivalry games this year. They beat Notre Dame, now they beat Michigan State. Now the question going forward, and I'm sure we'll get to this at some point, next week against Ohio State, can they do it? So we'll see, but so far it was a good win for the program, and it was something I think they felt like they needed to do.
And the best that Shea Patterson had ever done as Michigan passer, too. Biggest game ever against the rivals from East Lansing and Sparty as well. Tom Brady had the most passing yards individually against Sparty before that. Shea Patterson now with the record high. I mean, pretty impressive from him last Saturday. Describe his performance and what you saw from him.
I thought it was his best game in a Michigan uniform. Statistically, it was. I think he was very efficient. He completed the. When I went back and looked at I rewatched the game the other morning, and obviously there's been some criticism of Shea this year, whether it's his inaccuracy or his uncomfortable look in the pocket, whatever his turnovers, whatever the case may be. But he played, I thought, his best game by far. He limited the mistakes. He was hitting receivers in stride. He looked confident back there. It looked like almost like the Shea Patterson of last year, toward the end of the year, what we saw when he was breaking out of the pocket when he had to. He was making the throws over the middle. He was hitting guys in stride, hitting them accurately. He was the guy. This is the Shea Patterson, I think, Michigan fans were kind of hoping for from a consistent basis all year long last year and then this year. We've seen it in spurts. But he played a very good game on Saturday, and he was one of the big reasons why the offense was so successful and was so efficient.
So do you think Michigan has started to quiet the doubters after what happened against Wisconsin? I mean, not looking great early on, even losing that game against Penn State, and not looking great in the first half on the road there at Penn State. Do you think Michigan has started to quiet the doubters at this point, Aaron?
It's a complicated question because when you step back and look at the goals coming into this year and what the preseason expectations, and Michigan was picked to win the Big Ten by many folks, including myself, before the year. That's out of the question now. They can't win the Big Ten championship. However, I think they've redeemed themselves after that loss at Wisconsin. There were many folks within the program, and obviously the fans on the outside, they were worried. I mean, they were panicking. Fans in Ann Arbor were upset. I can remember specifically driving to the office and listening to talk radio, and fans were calling, and they were mad. They were genuinely mad. And after that loss and the Penn State loss, Michigan needed to do something to prove to make sure the season wasn't a disaster or a failure. They've been able to turn that tide. They've won 3 in a row now, 6 of the last 7. Now they need to finish strong. I think they need to, for this season, I think to be deemed a success, despite not getting to the Big Ten title, despite not getting in the playoff discussion. They need to beat Indiana, and they need to beat Ohio State. It's certainly possible. We'll see here going forward. But yes, I think they've redeemed themselves. Quieted the doubters, I don't know. I think there's always going to be doubters for Jim Harbaugh. I mean, until he gets over the hump and gets Michigan into the Alabama, Georgia territory, Clemson, whatever team you want to throw up there, there are always going to be doubters.
Let me ask you, based on all this time that you've covered Michigan now, how many years have you covered Michigan football? Third season. Have you ever seen less juice surrounding the Michigan State game?
Yeah. It's funny because I was thinking about that going in. The way Michigan State has played, they obviously weren't playing their best football. They've struggled this season. Michigan didn't have a ton to play for in terms of the playoffs and the Big Ten title picture. But it seemed like internally, the players seemed a little more hungry and more juiced up than they have been in previous years. It was weird. They weren't afraid to say this, the controversial things. Emery Thomas was throwing out the big brother, little sister comment. So I think internally they were juiced. Outside, it was more of a mixed bag just because there wasn't a ton to play for. Obviously, the fans wanted the victory. They got it. But I think for that game to really matter and be a big spectacle that it has been in years past, you need the outside. You need something to play for, whether it's the title or the playoff. That just hasn't been there, and I think that's the dampening moment, I think, with this Michigan team this year.
What's the climate of the locker room when it comes to calling Michigan State little brother? Do you think the majority of the locker room and the coaching staff is fine with that moniker for Michigan State?
I do, but I think they've been very careful about how they use it. I know from a PR perspective, the Michigan folks, they don't want that out there because obviously Michigan State has used it in the past to their advantage, as you saw. But you can't control what players say and what they feel, and this comes up every year, whether or not Michigan State or Ohio, which one of the two is the bigger rivalry. And in the past 3 years, it almost seems like the Michigan players are more fired up to play Michigan State than they are Ohio State. I don't know why that is, or maybe it's the in-state factor, maybe Michigan State's dirtier, in game. I don't know. But it always seems like the players are juiced up to play Michigan State, and you saw that Saturday with how chippy and with all the penalties and the unsportsmanlike conducts in that game.
Harbaugh's always good for a quarter or two, and then he comes out on Monday after the Michigan State game and says the following. Now, this is very interesting to me. Open quotes here. You can't plant potatoes one day and expect to eat potato salad the next day. Close quotes there. What the heck does that mean? And why did it even come up, that response from Jim Harbaugh?
So he was asked about the offense finding their stride and whether, first off, it precipitated before that. He was asked a question whether or not he thought his team could go toe-to-toe with any team in the country. He kind of sidestepped the question and said, well, we're focused on Indiana this week and the 1 week at approach of time. But he was asked to follow up later on about his offense and whether or not it had hit another level. He keep in mind, Jim Harbaugh, after the win over Iowa, like 6 weeks ago, they won 10-3. The offense was still sputtering at that point, but he said at the time, we're going to hit our stride. We're going to get there. I'm seeing it in practice. He claimed he was seeing. I mean, he said he was seeing things. We from a game perspective, he wasn't seeing it. But I think that quote was in reference to the fact that they started early on. Obviously, the offense wasn't great early in the season. You saw bits and pieces of it. But now, the last few weeks, it's really come on. The run game has been there, obviously, for the last month or so. But the pass game, getting guys open in space, utilizing the receivers more of what was discussed early in the year is starting to happen. It's funny because I asked John Runyon after Jim Harbaugh said those quotes of whether or not it was fair or not for us to assume that this Michigan offense would be gung-ho and racing down the sidelines and averaging 400 or 500 yards a game early on. And he said, yeah, it was unfair. I mean, when you bring a new offensive coordinator, Josh Gaddis, first year calling plays, a completely new scheme, I think folks, when vision's, hindsight's 2020, it took this team a while to get going, and I think they finally hit their stride. Illinois, and most folks are saying second half against Penn State.
And really, how low was Michigan? they were really low offensively and sputtering, as you said yourself, Aaron, against Iowa. I mean, a game that's kind of like in the distant past now, where Michigan fans are trying to forget about and pundits alike. But it was a 10-3 victory, as you said. It was ugly offensively, and then Wisconsin also that game you got routed in. So those two games, ugly offensive performances, and the Michigan offense just it sputtered the first half of the season. You could really say right now. So honestly, at the same, time, how about Harbaugh and how impressive really he's been, and Josh Gaddis? You can spin it that way as well. Exactly. And I know for sure Michigan PR-wise will definitely spin it that way in a positive fashion, but Harbaugh has been impressive in how this offense has been turned around this season too.
Yeah, and keep in mind, I mean, Harbaugh's an offensive guy. He's always been a quarterback guy. He knows the X's and O's when it comes to the offensive side of the ball. And by and large, Michigan's offense has been fine over the years. I think they weren't very good in 2017. I thought they showed signs last year in 2018 of being very good. I mean, Shea Patterson's numbers were some of the best from a starting quarterback at Michigan in a long time, just efficiency-wise, completion-wise. The argument was made they could have utilized them more, and that was one of the reasons I think they brought in Gaddis and changed the offense so they could try and utilize Patterson and their playmakers more. I mean, they were returning Donovan Peoples-Jones, Tariq Black, Nico Collins. You go down the line. Ronnie Bell's obviously really emerged at the receiver position, but there was a feeling that they could get more out of the offense. And when bringing in Gaddis from Alabama, who liked to utilize the tight ends and the receivers. I mean, Jerry Jeudy's a Heisman candidate, or he was for a while. He's a guy at Alabama that Gaddis really nurtured. So the feeling was you brought in Gaddis, he could do some of that here in Michigan, and it's starting to happen. It took them probably half the season to get going. I was joking with people a few weeks ago, maybe they should have brought in Gaddis last year to get things going, and then they could have maybe gotten off to a better start this year. But hindsight again, it's 2020. It didn't start as fast as they wanted it to, but now it's starting to turn the tide. It's starting to look better, I think, than it has all season long. And perhaps, I thought this game last week against Michigan State was, from a passing perspective, I think was one of their best games in the last 2 years. Now the key is translating that and getting consistent play week out of week. They've got 2 games to prove whether they can do that or not.
And Michigan doesn't appear to be tired. It appears to be clicking in all cylinders at the right time, too, getting hot at the right time in the season. Now, in the other side of the spectrum, you have Michigan State, who looks tired, and everything is going wrong for them. And I know you cover U of M. You're on the beat for U of M at M Live. But from what you've seen from MSU this season and against Michigan a week ago, I mean, how bad does it look for Sparty Nation, you think?
I mean, not good. The losses the last few weeks have spiraled. I mean, they had a tough schedule. I think they had Wisconsin, they had Penn State. I mean, they've had a difficult schedule, and those string of losses really hurt them. Combine that with the suspensions with Joe Bocci. You've had several guys leave for the transfer portal. Now, granted, a lot of those guys didn't play a ton, but from a psychological standpoint, that just doesn't look good. When you see your teammates leaving, the losses are piling up. It isn't a good feeling. So I had a feeling that Michigan State would come out, amped to play Michigan on Saturday, and I think they did. They scored first. You could clearly see that they were there to play. But the talent gap between Michigan and Michigan State now has widened. Michigan has out recruited them now the last few years. They've got some talented guys. They've been able to develop them. And Michigan State's just gone the opposite way. I mean, the losses have piled up. The offense isn't what it was 2 or 3 years ago. And I was just telling someone this, I think on our podcast this week. 2 years ago, I was very impressed with Brian Lewerke. I thought he could have been one of the better quarterbacks in the Big Ten. And he just hasn't been able to duplicate what he did in 2017. I don't know if that's an offensive schematic reason, that he just doesn't have the playmakers around him. He just doesn't look like the same guy 2 years ago. And Michigan State just hasn't been able to put it together from an offensive perspective.
What's happened to Lewerke? I mean, like you said, 2 years ago, I thought he was the best passer in Michigan. Now he's the worst one, even among the MAC schools. I mean, yeah. I don't know. I don't watch the MAC enough, Aaron, but you could probably argue Brian Lewerke, based on recent performances and all throughout this season, God, he might be the worst passer collegiately in all of the state of Michigan right now.
Yeah, you're probably right. From an efficiency standpoint, even Saturday, it looked like a comedy. He had several throws fall short. I think he had 2 passes intercepted by Michigan. Didn't look like the same guy 2 years ago. And again, I don't know if that's just a lack of playmakers around him. Michigan State obviously shuffled the deck last year with their coaching staff. They shifted some guys around.
Probably didn't do the right thing in doing that, but D'Antonio protecting his cronies, it looked like, right? That's
what it sounded like to me. And they haven't gotten much of a difference this year. I mean, early on this season, it looked like maybe they had a chance to. I think they scored a bunch of points in a couple of games. Western Michigan, I think, was one, but they haven't been able to put it together on a consistent basis. And I think D'Antonio, and I don't want to say he's going down with the ship, but he's been loyal to his coaches, good or bad, and that's his decision. But Michigan State's going to have an interesting next year or two to decide whether or not they want to stick with D'Antonio.
And D'Antonio wants to come back. Mm-hmm. He spoke about it earlier this week about, hey, he's coming back for 2020. Now, does State want him? Now, I don't know if you know, or nobody probably knows right now about D'Antonio's future and what Michigan State thinks about him. But, I mean, he looks tired. He looks defeated. And he has stuck, I think, to his cronies to a fault. Been loyal to a fault, as you were saying yourself, Aaron. And it's cost him dearly, it looks like. And I just wonder, how much longer is the leash for D'Antonio? And should he retire to save face before he gets fired and then tarnishes his legacy subsequently?
Keep in mind, he's due a huge retention bonus in January, February after the season. And that's been a sticking point that's come up several times now. Does he stay and get that, collect that? Do him and Michigan State agree on a potential buyout or a departure? I don't know. It seems like Michigan State's athletic director, Bill Beekman, who was put in place a year or two ago now, he's been pretty hands-off with things. He has said, I think, publicly now that D'Antonio has nothing to worry about. He has the support of the administration. So from my perspective, it sounds like they're going to continue with D'Antonio. But again, you have to wonder what he's thinking internally. Is he down and out? Does he think maybe I can't turn this around anymore? Keep in mind, I mean, he's had a very successful tenure there. He brought Michigan State to the playoff. They played in some of the biggest bowl games out there. They've had great success under him. But it's going to take another couple of years of strong recruiting, which, again, I think Michigan State's in the bottom 3 or 4 right now in the Big Ten when it comes to recruiting classes for next year. So they don't have a ton of recruits coming in. They're going to have to do some dream work here to try and turn things around. And you wonder if D'Antonio still has it in him.
And isn't it something to think, Aaron, too, that D'Antonio has been to a college football playoff? Harbaugh has not. And you look at Michigan and Michigan State. How about that gap? Can you speak upon that, too? How big is that gap, you think, right now between U of M and Michigan State, talent-wise?
It's widening, and you see it from the recruiting classes. I mean, Michigan has, in the last 2 or 3 years, had either the top or the second best recruiting class in the Big Ten. Ohio State's always up there as well, and you see the gap between Ohio State and Michigan. There's a gap there as well. So I think between Michigan and Michigan State, it's widening. The recruiting is a telltale sign of that, but also the results on the field. Michigan's now won 2 in a row. They've beaten them 2 of the last 3 years, or 3 of the last 4. They've gotten the upper hand of the Spartans the last few years, and that matters to recruits too, because both schools are recruiting some of the same kids. Michigan, I think, is an upper class when it comes to recruiting, but they do go after the same kids, and those kids see the results on the field. They see the losses piling up in East Lansing. They see Harbaugh still winning 9 or 10 games a year, so that definitely helps Michigan.
And then really, what have kids seen, right, that are high school right now, high school age, they haven't seen Michigan State win. It's been such a long time now that, that affects recruiting, doesn't it? And you've seen that, 100%. I bet, yourself.
I mean, and you'll see kids all the time. I think it was, a few weeks ago, there was a commit at Rutgers. Rutgers was getting destroyed, and at halftime, he announced on Twitter he was decommitting. So kids, they watch these games. They want to see victories. You can get away with 1 or 2 losses, but when you have a 4-8 season or a 5-7 season, maybe 6-6, Michigan State goes this year, it doesn't help the recruiting front. And at the end of the day, the result is it helps your rival, because Michigan's just winning more football games, and they're winning bigger football games.
Too bad Rutgers didn't beat Ohio State to help out Michigan's case for winning the division. I thought it really would have happened. I thought Rutgers really had a great shot at winning.
Yeah.
But God, it's been really bad for Rutgers. I feel bad for them. But anyways, Ohio State and Michigan, the gap is pretty significant there, as well as you noted yourself already, Aaron. And what does Michigan have to do now, moving forward, to lessen that gap, you think?
Well, they're going to have to get upper hand in the recruiting. Michigan right now, I think, is top 10 nationally recruiting-wise. Ohio State's right around there. I wrote this after, Urban Meyer stepped down, retired, or whatever you want to call it, and Ryan Day took his spot. That opened the door for some of these Big Ten teams from a recruiting standpoint to get in and make up some ground. Now, Day obviously is working with the foundation there at Ohio State. There wasn't a ton that changed. He retained a few assistants. He brought in some others. He hired Greg Madison away from Michigan. At the same token, Ryan Day in a way is working from the very beginning. He's got to establish himself as the head coach. He's got to prove that he can still win football games. He has, so that helps. But it's an opportunity too for Michigan to step in with maybe some of these kids in Ohio, where Ohio State has dominated the recruiting front. And Jim Harbaugh is he's an established recruiter. He can go all over the country, walk into any school he wants, and sit down and talk to a kid. But there's a difference between sitting down and talking to them and landing them. And that's where I think Michigan, they can make up ground, but they need to win these football games. They need to win their big games. They have this year. I mean, they beat they beat Michigan State, they beat Notre Dame, and they have an opportunity next week to beat Ohio State. And if they can, I think Michigan can try and level that playing field.
The biggest question, though, Aaron, is Michigan ready for OSU 2 weeks from now. I mean, you can't look ahead too much because you don't want to take Indiana lightly on Saturday. Indiana 7-3 overall right now and looking better and better by the day, by the week. But still, people are looking ahead already to 2 weeks from now against OSU, as you know, Aaron. Is Michigan ready for that contest, you believe?
Are they ready? Yes. Do I think they're going to win? I have a hard time.
Still very tough for a lot of people, right, to say that right now, I think.
Because, going into last season, I told myself I wasn't going to pick Michigan to beat Ohio State until I saw something from Michigan to prove that. Now, Michigan went on the 10-game winning streak, and I think I ended up picking Michigan to win, and most folks did. I
remember that.
I can remember leaving Columbus last year and hearing, I went to like a Panera Bread, and I can remember.
I love Panera Bread, by the way.
Ohio
Love
State
it.
fans, they were talking. They were shocked that Michigan won, they were shocked that Ohio State won, and in that fashion that they did. No one expected that. And last year, I think Michigan's team might have been a little bit better. It's tough to say. But I will say this. Michigan's defense is still very good. Their offense is clicking on all cylinders, like you said earlier, at the right time. They're obviously finding themselves. This game is in Ann Arbor this year, I think, which helps. I think this game will be closer than it was last year. Now, that's not saying a ton. But I do think Michigan State wins this game. Now, if Michigan can play a perfect game, if they can limit the turnovers, not turn the football over, and make a play in special teams, you saw Giles Jackson return a kickoff return for a touchdown a few weeks ago against Maryland. If they can get a break or two there, play strong defensively, not give up 40 or 50 points like they did 62 points like they did last
My
year.
God, nobody saw that coming. Yeah, that was bad.
They can keep it close. I do think they can keep it close. I think they can keep it within a score, a touchdown, and potentially, maybe pull off an upset. But at this point in the game, if I had to lay a prediction down right now, I'm picking Ohio State.
And playing a game of Big Vito's over under, it's a highly popular game. You've heard about it, right?
Yeah.
Big Vito's
I've done it a few times.
You've done it a few times too. So over under 50%, then the chances, how about 45.5%? The chances of Michigan pulling off the upset, even though. It's at home, but it still would be an upset, I know, too, 2 weeks from now.
Over under 45. I will say under, but not by much. I think it's maybe a 60-40 chance there. Again, Michigan's going to have to play well. They're going to have to play almost perfect to have a chance. And I think there's a possibility. They've cut down on the number of turnovers, and that's something Josh Gaddis and the players have brought up a ton. They turned the ball over, I think it was 13 times in the first 6 games. When you tack on the number of fumbles that they recovered, it was probably closer to 20. They were bobbling the football a ton. They've really cut that back the last few weeks. I think they've had 2 in the last 4 or 5 games. So they've done a better job of that. If they can limit the turnovers, the mistakes, and play football like you saw last week against Michigan State, whose defense isn't walk in the park either. Michigan's defense is strong, it's solid. Now Joe Bocci's not in there, but if they can play like they did Saturday, throw the football around like they did, and get the receivers involved, they'll have a shot. Will they win? I have a tough time at this point saying they will.
Tough for a lot of people to say that right now, I know. Now, Michigan earlier in this season dealt with those miscues like you were saying, a lot of turnovers. They were committing left and right, and the boo birds were plentiful when it came to Jim Harbaugh, and they wanted his head on a platter, a lot of alums and fans alike. Now, well, things have changed, but regarding that point, when all that naysaying regarding Harbaugh was happening, was he really on the hot seat from what you know? Because as much as maybe he looked bad, the team was performing poorly, and people wanted him gone, I still don't believe he was really on the hot seat, Aaron. And from what you know, was he even a little bit on the hot seat, you think? From
a Michigan perspective, no. The athletic director, Ward Manuel, has time and time again said that he wants Jim Harbaugh to stay here and be the coach as long as he wants to be. And from the president perspective, Mark Schlissel, I think he was asked this question at the beginning of last year, whether Jim Harbaugh's on the hot seat, because again, the same discussion came up, and he's always said no. Jim Harbaugh, and I fully believe this, Jim Harbaugh will coach at Michigan as long as he wants to. Now, was Jim Harbaugh on the hot seat maybe within himself? Maybe was he rethinking things? Was he maybe looking at the NFL? I don't know, but it wouldn't surprise me. I've always said this because I get this question a lot. Jim Harbaugh will stay as long as he wants to, and it will be his decision whether he leaves or not. Whether another NFL job comes up, maybe he decides to retire one day or step down. I find that hard to believe. But no, from Michigan's perspective, they're full in on Harbaugh. This is an interesting point going into the offseason. It's something we're going to go back to. But Jim Harbaugh only has 2 years left on his contract. He's due for an extension or a pay raise this offseason. Now, from a recruiting perspective, you probably want more years on your contract. So that'd be something to watch. But Jim Harbaugh is not on the hot seat as far as I know. Ward Manuel has been at his side time and again. He's at the post-game press conference after every game, home and away. He's by Harbaugh's side. They're friends. He considers himself friends. No, Jim Harbaugh will stay at Michigan as long as he wants to, I think.
So you think another 5 years? He's almost going to be finishing up his 5th season as head man at Michigan. Could you see another 5 years from Harbaugh at Michigan too?
Absolutely. Michigan has been. We were talking about this after the game against Michigan State on Saturday, but it's almost like Michigan is on the when you look at the top level of college football, the Alabamas, the Clemsons, you can probably put Georgia, whoever you want to put up there. Ohio State's probably in that realm. Michigan is probably at the very top of that next level. They just haven't been able to break through. And the question is, if you're Ward Manuel or the president of Michigan, if you decide to move on from Jim Harbaugh, can the next person you bring in get yourself into that hump? And I think you have more to lose than gain at that point. Jim Harbaugh has brought stability to the Michigan football program. They've won 8 to 10 games every year. They've been one game away from the Big Ten title game twice. They've been in that discussion. There's very few issues with the program. You don't see the issues of Ohio State. Guys are really getting in trouble. The grades are good. The APR scores are high. There's very little negative PR coming out of Michigan. The only negative PR and the only problem, the complaining, are not getting the Big Ten championships and the national titles. And I fully believe that Michigan believes that Jim Harbaugh will eventually get there. How long it takes remains to be seen. Obviously, the fan base is growing frustrated, and rightfully so. I mean, they have it right. And this is his 5th season. You'd think by now that he'd been able to get there. He hasn't. But I do believe if you keep him here long enough, with the staff he has around him, he has some of the best recruiters in the country, not just from an opinion standpoint, but they're ranked by the recruiting services. They're bringing kids in. They're doing things the right way and what Michigan believes. And eventually, I think they believe they'll get there.
And then isn't it a factor, too, that Rich Rod and Brady Hoke left the Michigan football program in such a bad state that Harbaugh, when he came on board in 2015, well, he didn't have a lot to work with. So isn't that a factor that kind of gets forgotten a lot, too, you think, among the naysayers of Jim Harbaugh?
Absolutely. I mean, when you consider Brady Hoke's best year was Rich Rod, but was his first year at Michigan. It went all downhill from there. Now, they were still, I think, recruiting fairly well when Brady got here. But a lot of those kids obviously left after he left. So Jim had to come in and stabilize things, and then start doing things his way. It took a couple years. I mean, I guess the second year he was here, they were again one game away from that. You can make the argument they should have beaten Ohio State and gotten the Big Ten title game. So it's almost come down to a couple plays, a couple games, and Michigan's right there. The question going forward is whether or not they can do it, and we just talked about it. Whether Jim Harbaugh can get them over the hump. Michigan believes so. I think Jim Harbaugh believes so. But they're going to need to, and we talked about this earlier, make up ground with Ohio State from a recruiting perspective, and then start beating Ohio State. That's basically been Harbaugh's Achilles heel since he's gotten here. You can dispute the record against Michigan State. You can say that they don't win enough games, whatever. But if they would even have a 500 record against Ohio State in Harbaugh's tenure, they probably would have gotten in at least one Big Ten title game and potentially gotten into a playoff.
As you know, one of the biggest criticisms of Harbaugh is winning the big game, beating Ohio State, which he hasn't done to this point, obviously. And one of the biggest critics of him is ESPN pundit Paul Feinbaum. Have to bring him up and what he said about Michigan program and the state of it, and how Michigan is satisfied with the 8-9, like 9 wins a season, and they're good. That's all they got to do, win 9 games, have the winning seasons consecutively and whatnot. Do you believe that and get that vibe out of Ann Arbor at times regarding that football program?
So I think Paul Feinbaum has a point. I do think Michigan is satisfied with the job Harbaugh has done, for the points I brought up earlier, that the program is relatively clean. There are no major issues. They're going about things like the right way. At least that's how they look at things. They're not cutting corners. They're not cheating like maybe they presume some other schools are doing. They just haven't gotten that one win or two. From Feinbaum likes to. You got to keep in mind from Paul Feinbaum's perspective, he likes to take shots at
and rile up the masses,
exactly.
right?
He's an SEC guy. He's pushed from the SEC. He likes to push buttons. He's done it before. He'll probably do it again. Jim Harbaugh is obviously he's shot back in the past before too. But I think for Michigan's, he's got a point. I mean, I think Michigan is happy with the job Harbaugh has done. You can dispute his record all day and his success. But again, I think Michigan believes they have the right guy there, and that there's no one else out there that could do a better job.
What grade right now would you give Harbaugh for what he's done?
For his entire tenure?
Yeah, so far, overall tenure.
Probably a B+, BB+. I think he's won a lot of games. He's won the games that Michigan should win. He's had trouble on the road, but that's not immune just to him. I mean, you look at, I think, a couple weeks ago, I heard James Franklin's road record against ranked teams was like 1-7 and 1. It was very similar to what Jim Harbaugh's was earlier this year. So it's those type of records aren't immune aren't just exclusive to Jim Harbaugh. It happens all over the country. But he's done a good job. He's kept the program in good shape. He's brought notoriety to the program. They're still, and I wrote this earlier this year, we did this big series on Jim Harbaugh and Michigan's football program, but they're still filling seats. People are still watching Michigan football, whether you like them or not. People still care about Michigan football, and Michigan football is still relevant, and I think that's one of the reasons why they like Jim Harbaugh. I mean, they're always in the news. They're always being talked about. People still care, and they're winning football games. They just haven't won they haven't beaten Ohio State.
The ultimate game.
And I think eventually they'll get there. It's just a waiting game. It's going to take time. And as I said earlier, Michigan football fans have a right to be frustrated. I mean, I get it. You know, the Michigan athletic department, the Michigan football program brings in a ton of money every year revenue wise. They're one of the most not profitable, one of the most successful college football programs in the country. Historically, they've won a lot of football games, and Jim Harbaugh is part of that. And so I think, you know, BB plus, he's done a good job. He just hasn't gotten over the hump. And again, I think, like I said earlier, I think Michigan believes he will one day.
Piggybacking off of something that you just said about the Michigan football brand, still high level, prestigious. They're selling out games, 100,000+, right? Every single game at the Big House. And then I thought of something. Neither of us, I believe, brought up Michigan routing Notre Dame at the Big House earlier this season. That was huge. And then Notre Dame subsequently now has ended its sellout streak at home. I mean, think about that and what it did to Notre Dame. Whereas Michigan, through all of this, even though Harbaugh maybe hasn't won the big game and hasn't beaten Ohio State yet, well, still, they're selling out games. They're still this hugely profitable and successful national brand. I know Notre Dame is too, but isn't it a factor and a bigger factor than some people at least think that Michigan is bringing the fans still into the stands? When you look at Notre Dame, even a national brand like that, and now they're failing to sell out games actually there?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a testament to Michigan's, like you meant, their brand power. College football nowadays has become more of a TV event. People would rather stay home or tailgate and watch on the TV than go in the stadium. I mean, so many programs are having trouble filling the seats, like you mentioned. Notre Dame's a perfect example. You look at some of the games in East Lansing this year. They were, selling tickets for like $5 or $10. I mean, they're having trouble filling the seats as well. Michigan still continues to fill the Big House. Not only that, but if you look at the TV ratings for their football games, whether they play at noon or 7 o'clock, I mean, they're consistently, and even against, like early in the year against Middle Tennessee State and Army, they're consistently one of the most watched football games of that weekend, whether it was at noon or night or what on their BTN, whatever. People still watch them. Whether now you say maybe people are hate watching, but people care about them. People want to see them win or lose, and I think that is a testament to the brand and the football program, and in some ways Jim Harbaugh.
And I wonder how much that keeps Jim Harbaugh's job safe moving forward, too. I mean, you see him in commercials. The guy's a brand himself, right? I think he's received endorsement money himself from Nike. So, I mean, he's doing well, and he's in campaign ads. I mean, all over TV, you name it. So, I wonder how much that as well keeps his job safe moving forward.
Oh, absolutely. I think that is part of it. That works into the decision of his success or failure at Michigan from the administration standpoint. And they knew what they're getting when they brought him here. I mean, he's very much a magnet for the media. He likes attention. He does things for attention. You saw that early in the year, or early in his tenure at Michigan, when he went on those crazy recruiting trips. He had to sleep over.
Yeah, staying overnight, slumber parties.
Yeah, he knew what he was doing. He knew he'd get the attention, and in a way, I think that helps. That absolutely helps him. Helps Michigan, and it brings attention to them. People pay attention. They care about it. They react. They read. They give commentary. In a era where college football is such a big business and such a big deal, you need the marketing. Harbaugh brings it.
Let's bring this up, too. There is a game on Saturday, another game before Ohio State. People, don't want to believe that, but there is. Against Indiana on Saturday. You're going to that game. We'll be there covering it, obviously, for MLive. How about this game coming up? What should we expect from U of M against IU on Saturday?
The question has come up time and again this week of whether or not this is a trap game. I mean, it's sandwiched in between Michigan State and Ohio State. So the feeling is, and understandably so, that maybe the Michigan players are overlooking Indiana. And this comes up again because the last few years Indiana has always fallen before Ohio State. Maybe that plays into their hand because Indiana, recently at least, has played Michigan very well. I mean, Michigan hasn't lost to them since, I think, 1987. It's a ridiculous winning streak. It's lopsided, but in the way in the last few years, and the Michigan players brought this up, it's almost like a rivalry. I mean, Indiana treats this game as one of their more intense ones of the year.
Like their Super Bowl almost, right?
A little bit. The last 4 years, all the games have been decided by, I think, 11 points or fewer. The last 2 games in Bloomington, including 2017, went into overtime. I think 2017 went into like double overtime. So Indiana always plays them well, and I think And even when they're not playing well, I mean, they've had some decent teams in recent years. They've won 5, 6, 7 games. This year, I think, is one of their best teams in a couple decades now. They've already have 7 wins. They could probably finish the year with 8 or 9. 9 if they perhaps knock off Michigan. So it's a game where I think Michigan isn't overlooking. They realize that they need to get their job done this week before Ohio State, because you lose this week against Indiana, and the feeling is maybe the wheels could fall off. Everything they've built up to this point, they need to continue. They need to build on, and I think that's how they're approaching this game on Saturday.
And I think if Michigan loses to IU on Saturday too, it's like, forget about Ohio State. I mean, you still want to beat them, but then you would have to for sure. Mm-hmm. Michigan Nation needs to see a victory against OSU then for sure. If you lose to IU, and then really the season's over with. Mm-hmm. You almost start forgetting about this season, and you move on to next season, right, Aaron? So it'd be devastating for U of M Nation to lose on Saturday, I would say. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, this is a game they expect to win. They've won for a long time now. Michigan's playing very good football, and Indiana's too. I mean, if you look at their schedule, they lost by 7, I think, last week to Penn State. They hung in there. They did lose by 9 to Michigan State earlier this year, but they have I think 4 Big Ten wins. They're bowl eligible. I mean, they're playing better football. They're a better defensive team than we've seen in about a decade or so. It's a team that could give Michigan a scare. I think they're only a 7 or 8 point underdog at this point. But the way Michigan's playing and the way that they've come out offensively the last few weeks, I have to believe they're going to try and come out fast and strong and punch Indiana in the mouth and not make this a close one, because the players, they all brought it up this week. They all realize that Indiana plays them close. They come to play. And I think they made it more of an emphasis, Michigan has, the last few weeks, of starting faster, and I think you're going to see that on Saturday.
Don't take the Hoosiers lightly. No. You yourself, Aaron, okay? And everybody traveling to Bloomington. I mean, pretty cool story you were telling me about traveling to get there for Saturday. Can you describe to my listeners and I about what you're doing for that? 'Cause it sounds like a fun road trip.
Yeah, we're driving. This is my first road trip of the season. Typically, it depends how the schedule falls, but so like every other year, Michigan plays at Michigan State and Ohio State, so you usually drive to those games, but those are both home games this year. So the road schedule this year was a lot of flights. We flew to Wisconsin, flew to Maryland, Penn State. That's a debatable drive, but I ended up flying anyway because it's kind of the middle of nowhere. But Indiana, we're going to actually make the drive. Me and my colleague Ryan Zook at MLive, he covers the team with me as well. This will be his first road game of the year, so I figured let him come along. We're bringing a photographer, Mike Mulholland. We're bringing a free press writer, so we're going to make the 4.5 hour haul to Bloomington. It should be fun. Middle of the afternoon Friday. The game isn't until 3:30 on
So
Saturday.
any shenanigans, I guess you got to be up to no good probably on Friday night,
That's right. So it should be fun, and it's a good game. It's a big game for I think both sides, and Michigan's and we talked. Michigan still has a lot to play for. They can still win out. They can win 10 games. They can get in a decent bowl. And keep in mind the bowl situation. There's an outside chance that Michigan needs a lot to happen at this point, but they could still get in the rolls with the Citrus Bowl. So the bowl situation's wide open, and for Michigan they need to start or finish strong, unlike last season when they lost to Ohio State and then they got clobbered in the bowl game.
No 62 points allowed, okay? Don't let that happen. Now, how about traveling earlier this season? You traveled to Penn State, obviously, for that Saturday night primetime game. Great game for Michigan in the second half. In the first half, though, not so much. The offense was in a tailspin. It wasn't productive. Anyways, a lot of people, Aaron, have commented that second half was a turning point for Michigan's season. Do you believe that as well?
I think so. That's when things started to click. It was weird because I think they trailed by a touchdown or 10 points at halftime. I forget what it was, but they were trailing obviously at halftime. They come out of the locker room and Jim Harbaugh gives the interview with ABC. I think that was the channel the game was on, and he had a quote about this being Michigan's finest hour. So I don't know if they came out of that half thinking they were going to throw everything in their playbook at Penn State offensively. I don't know what the mindset was, but Michigan in a way kind of followed up Harbaugh's words. I mean, they outgained Penn State on the ground. They matched scoring 14-14. They were a drop touchdown in the end zone away from forcing overtime in the game and potentially pulling the upset. It was a very different game from 2 years prior at Penn State when they thought they had a decent team. They went in there and got smacked from the get-go, and it was a blowout. So instead of folding in the second half like they did 2 years ago, under the lights with the whiteout going on, and I will say this from a traveling perspective, Penn State remains one of the coolest games, coolest places to watch a football game for me, especially at night. the whiteout. It's amazing. It's a cool, fun atmosphere.
How about that whiteout? And how big of a factor is that, you think, for Penn State?
I think it is a factor. Someone crunched the numbers, and Penn State's only like 500 a night out or whiteout game. So they're not exactly they don't dominate as much as you think they do, but it's loud in there. Like the press box was shaking. You could barely hear yourself think. So I can only imagine what it was like for the players. And some of the Michigan players even admitted afterwards it was hard to hear. They couldn't. They had to verbally do things or nonverbal like cues and things to get plays called. So it was difficult to hear. And I think it rattles you as a team early on. It's about how you respond and how you get over it. And Michigan, I think, was able to some degree.
And did it rattle Ronnie Bell in those final moments of the game? Speaking of that drop pass, you brought up yourself already. Yeah. Dropped that pass in the end zone, could have been a touchdown. Michigan could have won that game. Then against Penn State on the road would have been a great victory. But he dropped it and dealt with just all this madness afterwards, right? Death threats even. Yeah. And that's the ugly side of sports, isn't it, Aaron? And how bad was that? And what did you hear about how bad it actually got for him as well after that game?
Yeah, I know he heard it a lot. Social media was lit up with criticism, and that's always the case when someone screws up or someone has a bad game. Shea Patterson gets all the time.
Right, and criticisms are right.
Right.
But it's how far you take it too, right?
Exactly. Some of these fans, and I'll get nasty emails from fans all the time too. I can remember last year after the loss against Ohio State, I got nasty emails from fans full of curse words. And that wasn't necessarily at me, but they were just upset and mad. So I can only imagine what the players get or what the coaches hear. It gets bad out there. Ronnie was hearing it. He got that letter emailed to him from a fan that was plastered on social media that I think Dad put out there that made that big story. But yeah, he was hurting afterwards. I think ESPN or ABC showed him on the sidelines afterwards crying, and he was clearly emotional. He felt bad. I mean, he was Michigan's most reliable wide receiver target, and he still remains that to this day. I mean, he's had a very good season. He's emerged, I think, as their number one wide receiver in a group that includes all these big names that we always talk about: Peoples-Jones and Tariq Black and Nico Collins. Ronnie Bell has been the guy, and you see him drop that pass in the end zone. It obviously hurts the team. They didn't win the football game, but you kind of feel for the kid. I mean, they get this praise for when they do things well, but then when they screw up once, you'll never hear the end of it, and he heard the worst of it.
And it seems like he's persevered since. Productive all season long, great numbers, and you said in a talented wide receiver group too.
Yeah, he had a career high 9 catches for 150 yards against Michigan State. I mean, I think he was targeted 11 times, so he caught 9 of his 11 balls thrown his way. I mean, he was catching everything. It seemed like his yards after catch was impressive, and it wasn't just him; it was all Michigan's receivers. But he's had a very good season. He has a potential, I think, of being a very, very good receiver. Keep in mind, he's only a sophomore. He played all 13 games last year as a true freshman. Got his feet wet. He showed signs near the end of the year of playing well. But this year he's really brought it on. I mean, I think he has over 620 receiving yards, leads the team in catches, receiving yards. He still doesn't have a touchdown, which is weird.
That's crazy.
I know, and his teammates are ribbing him this week.
Got to get him one now, right?
Right. I think that's the feeling, and I think these next 2 weeks, perhaps Saturday against Indiana, you'll see Michigan try and hit him in the end zone.
So MVP of the season, Ronnie Bell? I mean, who is the MVP for you this season? And I guess, how about give me an offensive and defensive MVP?
Offensively, yeah, I would say Ronnie Bell is the MVP. I mean,
isn't it something without a touchdown catch though? But he still can be. You can still argue it very easily.
Absolutely. I mean, Shea Patterson's had a spotty season. He had a lot of turnovers early on. The running backs early on were inconsistent. You've seen Hassan Hoskins come on at times, but he hasn't been consistent. Ronnie Bell I think he's been the most consistent guy on the offensive side of the ball. He's played very well. Maybe you could come in with one of the offensive linemen, although it's hard to measure them because there's no statistics
to quantify it, right? I mean, like what Pro Football Focus now does measure it.
Yeah,
but
Cesar Reeves has played well. Mike Onwenu has played well. Bredesen's played well. But from a statistical perspective and just efficiency perspective, Ronnie Bell has to be the guy in the offense. Defensively, it's probably one of a couple guys.
There's more options, right, on defense, I would say.
Kwity Paye he's quietly had a very good year. He started playing well at the end of last season. He was suspected to be a starting defensive end going into this year. He's played incredibly well. Aiden Hutchinson's had his moments. Josh Uche, I think, has been very good. Again, he's Michigan sacks leader again. That's more of a difficult thing. I'll probably go with Kwity Paye. He had a couple of really big games from a sacks perspective. He was getting guys involved. Another guy that's coming up, and Harbaugh and the coaching staff have been very careful about hyping him up. But Cam McGrone at linebacker, I think he has a potential of being a Devin Bush guy here in another year or two. He's a redshirt freshman. He started every game since I think Wisconsin, when Josh Ross went down with an injury. He has that sideline to sideline speed that we saw from Devin Bush. He hits hard. He seems like he's always around the football. But yeah, defensively, I'm going to go with Kwity Paye. But they've got several guys on that side that have stepped up this year that could be very good in a couple of years.
How about the secondary guys, too? My God, those guys are really darn good. A lot of PSL kids as well.
Yeah, very
in that
experienced.
group.
Yeah, you got Lavert Hill, Ambry Thomas. Lavert Hill, I think, it's weird. Like, he's always good every year, but he's like quietly good because the football isn't thrown his way much. I mean, last week I think he had a pick. I think he was targeted like 3 times the whole game. So the team's purposely trying to like not throw to his side because they know he's such a lockdown good defender. And Ambry Thomas, I think, is one of the more interesting, coolest stories on the team. I mean, he started the season in the summer on a hospital bed. The coaching staff thought he wasn't going to be able to play, perhaps all season long. He comes back like 4 games in. He's played incredibly well. He's had a couple interceptions. He's had a couple forced fumbles. Last week, I think he had 6 tackles or 5 tackles. The guy's played incredibly well. First full-time year starting, he's going to be good in another year or two as well.
Crohn's disease, right?
Yeah, yep.
Had a battle through that. My God, he's been really good this year. Can only get better, you would think, too. And that defense has been stout, really, for the majority of the season, too.
Yeah, I think other than that hiccup against Wisconsin, that's been the story with this defense. Statistically and largely, they're very good. They're top 10 again. I think their pass defense is number 5 in the country again. This defense and the run stop has improved as well. It's just they give up. There's that 1 or 2 games where they get hosed. You saw it against Wisconsin. The crossing routes hurt them. They were giving up big plays, and you saw it last year with Ohio State and Notre Dame. So if they can, the key I think obviously on next Saturday against Ohio State will be scoring more points than they did last year and putting together a turnover-free game, but the defense is going to have to come to play as well. They're going to have to keep Ohio State in check. They're just as explosive as they were last year. I think Don Brown has learned a lot more.
Would hope so after last year, right? Better ever learn, right?
They've deployed more of a 3-4 zone scheme than they have in previous years. You're seeing Michigan utilize Mike Dana more than in a 3-4 scheme. They've been running more through defensive ends. And I think you'll see more of that against Ohio State next week to try and slow the passing game.
How about this now? X Factor to beat IU and then OSU the following week.
X Factor to beat IU. Probably someone a running back, one of the running backs, whether it's Zach Charbonnet or Hassan Haskins. Michigan has established that they can throw the football. They did it against Penn State. They did it last week against Michigan State. I think they'll have to do that again. But I think to be wholly successful offensive, they're going to have to have a balanced attack. So I think Zach Charbonnet or Hassan Haskins are going to have a big game. And historically, if you look, Michigan's running backs have played well against Indiana. 2 years ago in Indiana, with that overtime game, I think Chris Evans and Karan Higdon both had, I think, 200 yards rushing or something like that. It was ridiculous. They combined for almost 400 yards. It was a ridiculous stat. I think if IU is beatable anywhere, it's the defensive line. So they're going to need to run the football. So one of the running backs, I think, will have to have a big game. Should they have a big game, Michigan, I think, should cruise to victory. Did you ask for a defensive?
OSU, too.
OSU. I think Shea Patterson. He's the X factor against Ohio State. He needs to have a clean game. He needs to hit guys in stride. He needs to be accurate with his throws, not make mistakes. If he can do that, I think Michigan has a shot.
And you brought up Chris Evans, too. How about that? Another topic for this podcast.
That's right.
How about him coming back, being eligible for 2020? How big of a factor will that be for Michigan?
It gives Michigan another option because I think Evans would, and I said this before the season even started when he was deemed ineligible, but he would have fit this offense very well. He can obviously run the football, as we all see, but he can get out in space and catch balls and get yards after contact. He's one of those guys, I think that when Josh Gaddis was coming in, I think he looked, and we haven't spoken to Josh Gaddis about Evans because he was out all year, but I think when Gaddis got here, Evans is a prototypical guy that would fit his offensive scheme well. He would have, I think, made a difference, and I think he would have had played a big factor this year. So I think next year he comes back. Now he joins a crowded running back room. They bring back Zach Charbonnet, they bring back Hassan Haskins, they'll get Christian Turner back. I think True Wilson graduates, but they'll have 3 or 4 backs with experience. So Evans will be an option there. I'm curious to see what type of shape he is in. I mean, it sounds like he's been working out all off season. He's been still doing things. He's still been around. But how quickly he gets back in shape and how quickly he learns the offense, I think will be key.
How about this now? The coolest under-the-radar story that you've written about the program this season.
Under the radar.
Or that you've covered that should be reflected upon. Interesting topic.
I think defensively, Michigan's improvement stopping the run. They started the year with uncertainty with the defensive line, the interior of the defensive line. They didn't have a lot of depth there. They still don't have a lot of depth there. They figured out a way to go around that. So Donovan Jeter was hurt at the beginning of the year. Mike Dwumfor was hurt. They're 2 defensive tackles. So they had to find a way to to change that. They like I said before, they're playing more of a 3-4 scheme with 3 defensive ends. They went from one of the worst run defenses in the Big Ten after Wisconsin, because Jonathan Taylor, keep in mind, Wisconsin rushed for almost 300 yards against Michigan. Jonathan Taylor had a big game. They were doing whatever they wanted to. And since then, I think Michigan's allowed, 1 or 2 teams over 100 yards rushing. So they've done a better job of knocking that down, getting better at that. And I think that's one of the reasons, too, why Michigan's done a better job. And they've won some of these big games like they have. I mean, Notre Dame... they weren't able to rush the football. Michigan State wasn't able to rush the football on Saturday, and that's one of the reasons I think the offense has done a better job too.
Enough about this Michigan football program now. Let's talk about Aaron the man McMann. I mean, come on, it's about you now, Aaron. Coolest travel story for yourself this season in covering the team?
Coolest travel story?
Got to be something cool, right? I mean, I know not everything's cool or fun. Okay.
Yeah,
but
so like 2 weeks ago, they were at Maryland. It was my birthday. So
nice,
I got
okay.
So I got to celebrate my birthday in Washington, D.C., flew into D.C., got to stay downtown. The hotel upgraded me to one of the biggest suites in the hotel, so I had this huge room to myself. It was kind of cool. The game was at noon on that Saturday. So I got to cover the game, and then went out with a couple friends in D.C. and in Virginia afterwards. So you got to cover the game. It was a fairly easy game. Obviously it was a blowout, so it was easy to cover, I guess.
Easy to write that game story too, right?
That's right.
That's nice.
And then I got to go out afterwards and enjoy it in D.C., which is one of my favorite towns. There's just the bar scene's cool.
So I've got to ask you though. I mean, where in D.C. then? What kind of bars? Any names that pop out to you that you can remember? I guess at least still.
We went up on, I think it was K Street near Howard University.
Nice.
We went to a couple bars. I can't remember the name, but there was this like 3-decker bar. It was like, I think one of the Irish bars, where it was like 3 levels. You kind of like go up the stairs, and there's like bouncers at every level because this place was packed. There was a line out the door.
College atmosphere too.
A little bit.
Yeah.
So it was fun, and I don't remember the name of it, but it was a blast.
Now, how about these suit jackets? You always wear a snazzy jacket.
For you, Vito, for you.
But for me, I know that's why you donned it today. Which one do you have, though, for us today? What brand? Do you know what brand?
I've got 3 of them. This is like my charcoal colored one. I don't know what brand it is, but I think maybe Men's Warehouse. I don't remember where I got it from.
I like it. We should snap a shot of that.
Yeah.
It looks really good on you, Aaron, too. Let me tell you that much. Now, back to the football side of things. End of the game on Saturday against IU. What is your score prediction for that one, if you're able and willing to release that right now with me, too?
Yeah, we just posted it today on MLive.com, actually.
Awesome.
I went with Michigan winning 34-17. Most folks have this game being a close one. As I mentioned earlier, Indiana's always played the Wolverines close. I think maybe it starts as a close game because Michigan has had some slow starts this year. They've obviously had the turnover issues I said earlier this year, and I don't know how this is going to play out. But I don't think this game is as close as some folks make it out to be. If you look at Indiana's schedule, they have 7 wins, but they played some of the worst teams in the Big Ten: Nebraska, Northwestern. They've had some easy victories. They had trouble with Michigan State earlier this year. Now they have gotten better. Yeah. So obviously Indiana played well at Penn State last week. It was on the road. It was, I think, one of their biggest tests of the season. Handled themselves well. But you have to wonder how Indiana is going to rebound from a loss. I mean, they haven't lost a game in a while now. With Michigan coming in playing as well as they have been, especially offensively, I just think Michigan cruises to a victory. I think they win double digits. I think it ends up not being a close one by the end of it. Michigan, obviously, they realize, and again, I mentioned earlier, they realize Indiana's going to try and play them tough. I don't think they're looking past this one at all, given the fact that they already have 2 losses. And they realize they need to finish strong to put an exclamation point on the season.
Aaron, good luck this weekend. Enjoy yourself, and best of luck the rest of the way this season as well. And hopefully Michigan pulls out a really good contest Saturday, but also against OSU to end the season.
Absolutely. I want something to write about, so absolutely.
Right? Something good for you to write about, too, at MLive. Aaron McMann from MLive.com. Thanks for all the time, man. Always a pleasure speaking with you, too.
Absolutely, Vito. Thanks for having me.
Adios.
I was trying to get it out of here. I want them dead presidents. I want to pull up, head spin, get it, get fly. I got 6 jobs.